Good morning, stampers and crafters. Welcome to Tina's Crafty Ink Spot. I'm Tina. This morning I've got a quick Stampin Blends tutorial for you. The other day I did some swan cards with some feathers, and I did a white and a black swan. I can put a link to that tutorial down below. But in my YouTube channel, I got several requests on how to color a black swan and still be able to come out with the details of his face. Well, what I'm going to do today is we've already done the feather tutorial, so you can implement there as you need. I'm going to show you how to do a white swan and a black swan with just your Stampin' Blends, so that you come out with a beautiful detailed black swan. This set that we're using today is coming out in the new catalog, and it's a hostess set called Prince and Princess. I absolutely love this swan. I just thought it was so pretty, and there's so many things you can do with it for wedding, anniversary, or just an everyday card like we did here today. So let's get started, and we are going to be using our Stampin' Blends. Now you can incorporate this if you don't have Stampin' Up alcohol markers. You can do this with your regular Copics or your Spectrum Noir. You're going to do the same concept. So today we are just going to use our Stampin' Blends. And let's start with the white swan first, because it's very quick and an easy way to add some detail. We also have here, I use my rubber mat when I'm coloring, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. So we've got some regular white cardstock here, and let's do our white swan first. So I always use my Stamparatus just because I can, restamp and get a nice clear stamped image. Sometimes when you stamp with a block and then you mess it up, you can't really restamp it. So let's just put her right here in the middle. And now for the white swan. Now, they always tell you to use your Magenta ink when you are using alcohol markers. That is absolutely correct, okay? You can also use StazOn and your markers won't bleed, but you just got to make sure that your StazOn is completely dry. But I didn't have any gray StazOn, so I'm just going to use my smoky slate for my white swan, because I don't want a real bold black outline. And it's going to work fine with our markers because we're not doing a lot of marker work on the white one, and a little bit of bleeding and blending with the gray is going to work out perfect for us. So I'm just going to use my smoky slate. We'll ink it up here. Nice firm image, and we have a nice light colored. You can use your smoky slate in your lighter colors also if you want to do no line coloring, okay? So those are colors you can use for no line. I'm going to go ahead and get our black swan stamped while I've got this set out. Let me make sure where he's at there. And I forgot a wipe here. So the black swan, I am going to use my Memento ink. I'll just ink him up. And remember, if you hold your stamp down for just a second, it gives the ink a chance to transfer really nicely to your paper. And that came out perfect the first try. So we're lucky there. close up our ink. Alright, we'll set him aside to dry. Now, if you don't have a rubber mat, your little, a lot of time you use it for adhesives and things. These are handy for multiple reasons. For coloring on, for when you're working with glue. You can even use this to do your reversed image stamping. I think a week or so ago I did a tutorial on reversed image stamping, and if you don't have one of the clear silicone stamps, you can use this. It'll work perfect. So these are really handy to have. And I'm due for a new one. I use them quite a bit, so I'm due for a new one. So the reason I use this, okay, when you're using alcohol markers, the trick is to keep your ink wet, because the wetter your ink is, the better it blends. So if you're coloring on a piece of paper, your image will tend to draw the ink through, you know, and dry it, okay? So this is just my preference, that I want my inks to stay wetter, so I'm going to use a different surface. You don't have one of these? Use your plate right here, color right on top of here. It's going, or a glass mat. It's going to keep your ink from absorbing through. Okay, so we're going to start on our white swan, which is stamped in the gray. And let me move in for you so that you're a little bit closer here. See if I can zoom in. That might work. Okay, so now I'm going to square. So with your white swan, you're trying to just give your dimension and your shadows to the white. And normally you would use either a light gray or a light blue to give those shadows. But since we stamped this in gray, I'm going to go ahead and use my light smoky slate. Okay, and then now you can use your black for this little detailed area on his face if you want, but I found just use your Stampin' Right marker works just as well for that. Okay, so let's take our gray, and I'm going to use the bullet tip because I'll have a little more control about where my ink goes. And I'm also going to bring in my color lifter, which is also works as a blender. Okay, so we're going to go to our bullet tip here, and we're going to figure out the parts that the light is closest to. Okay, so if you're looking at an image, the tips of his feathers are going to be closest to the light towards you. Okay, areas like right here on his chin going to be a little shadowed, so we're just going to put a little shadow there. Okay, and we'll just carry it out a little. So he may have another little shadow right here by his nose, maybe a little bit right here on the top, and then right in the crease of his neck here. So I'm just doing a really thin line, okay, to add some shadow. Let's add a little shadow to the back of his neck here. And his wing is in front of his chest, so let's carry some of that down. Okay. And now for his wings, we're going to go on the back side of those little wings, and we're just going to put a little shadow right behind there. See there? And you can even add a few little dots of your own, a little kind of V there, to add some shadow there on his wing. So we're just going to follow the line that the artist has already created for you, showing you the shadow of the wings. And we're just doing a real light shadow where it's casting behind the wings there, or the feathers, not the wings. Okay, then on these end ones, just follow the line that's already there by the artist. Just add a little bit on there. And that's just going to add a little more dimension. See there? Now that pretty much does him really nicely, doesn't it? Now where he's sitting, he's going to have some shadow here on his belly. So then what I'm going to do, and I always close my markers because alcohol evaporates quickly, so you want to keep your lids on. So now I'm going to take my blender tool, and all I'm going to do is go directly over those. So I'm coming to the edge of where I drew the line, and I'm just going right along it. And all that's going to do is cause that color to not have a harsh line. Okay? Now you may not see that blend starting right away when you hit it with your marker. It's okay. Give it a minute and it'll do its thing. So all I'm doing is going right along those same lines, and all it's going to do is get rid of any harsh lines you have and cause almost a second color, because it's just fading it out just a little bit. Oops, I missed one. Okay, see how that kind of just fades it out and bleeds it out a little bit? That's exactly what you want. Okay? So now I'm going to take my black Stampin' Up marker, and I'm just going to color this black area. You could use your Stampin' Blend for this if you wanted to, but it doesn't have as fine of tip as your marker does. So now for his eye there, I'm just going to bring in a white gel pen. Make sure it's working here. And I'm just going to add a tiny little white, like it's a tiny little reflection in his eye there. And it just kind of makes his eye pop. Let's see if that'll show up on film. See how it just kind of made his eye pop? And we'll just bring in some dark pumpkin pie for his beak. And pretty much there you are. You have your white swan. If you wanted to add a little bit of darker accent, you can do that. And all you would do is go as close to where the dark started and just touch your marker. And that's just going to kind of give you a little bit darker accent in a few areas. So you're just kind of going over what you've already done. Okay, you can do that if you'd like. You don't really need to. He's pretty well done the way he is. And he looks wonderful. So now, let's do the black. Now, on our black swan, we're pretty much going to be doing the same thing, but what I'm going to bring in is I have my dark basic black, I have my light basic black, I have the dark smoky slate, and we have our light smoky slate. Okay? So we want to start, I'm going to set aside the dark black to do final accents. So we're just going to set that aside. Let's start with our light basic black. And we're going to do basically the exact same thing we did on the white swan. I'm going to put his little shadows in. Go all the way around the edge there. Now you don't have to have a smooth line here. So if you want, what you can do, which helps the blending, is take your marker and you're just kind of, little jagged edge is fine, because all that's going to do later is help you blend. So we're going to do the same thing with his wings here as we did before. Follow the lines the artist has already created for you. Now, if you think this is going to take you a little while, you can do a section at a time. But you have this little mat or a glass mat below you, so your ink isn't absorbing into paper as quick. So you have a little more time for your ink to stay wet. And the good thing is most artists are already put things together for you. It seems a little time consuming, but as you practice doing this and figuring out where your shadows are on your images, it'll start to come natural to you. Okay, so I'm going to add some more along his body here. Okay, so now we've got our basic of where our shadows are going to start. Now you're going to do this with any of your images. When you're doing flowers or whatever, you start with your basic. Now I'm a dark to light because I want my darker colors to blend. Some people color light and then to dark. That's kind of whatever you want to prefer to do. So I'm going to go to my next darkest color, which is the dark smoky slate. And you're going to go right over those same lines, but bring it out a little bit. Okay, so if you have your dark line, okay, right there, then all you're going to do with your next marker is go all the way into it and bring it out a little bit. Okay, that's what you're doing. And as you do that, you can even use little tiny circles if you want. What you're doing is you're drawing the black out away from the darkest area and making it blend. So you're going to follow all the same lines you just did and go all the way into it, which will draw that dark black line out and make it bleed and blend. And we want to leave some white there, okay, because that little area right there is going to be the closest to the light. Okay, the same with the tips of your wings. You want to leave those lighter because they're closest to the light. Okay, so it's good to leave white areas because we can still have white or lighted dark areas, if that makes sense. So I'm just going right over the same thing I just did. And you'll notice as you go along that your black is starting to blend into the gray really well. So we're going to go do the same thing right along those dark areas of the feathers. And just bring it in or bring it out just a little bit farther than the lines you've already done. I'm trying to color without my hand in the way. I hope that works. I mean, this one's pretty detailed, so it takes you a minute to kind of go over all your areas. But you'll see the feathers are starting to define themselves. And if you don't think that the black is blended enough, feel free to go right back over it again. And the alcohol does the work for you. Okay, now I'm going to bring in my lighter gray, which is the light smoky slate. I'm going to go over the whole thing again. But now, with the lightest gray, I'm going to pull it all in together and go over everything you just did. Keep going over that dark black, and it's going to blend it. And it'll give you a dark to light shadow. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to add some more detail to him. So I'm going all the way into the colors I already did. Personally, I just use a little circular motion, but you can do it whatever easiest way it is for you to color. Because we're getting the basic color down, and then we're going to add a little more detail to him. I assume the real fancy swans are males. Kind of presumptuous, huh? Well, most of the male bird species are the real pretty ones. And see how it just kind of, all the colors kind of blend and mold together? Okay, so now we've got our basic layout, and we've got nice accent on his leaves, on his feathers. I'm going to go back to the gray, the dark gray, and I'm going to draw it out just a little more, just to make him a little more black. And that's nice and wet from that light gray. And if you want texture, what you can do instead of just coloring like that is you can actually do the dotted technique. Okay? And we may do that with a little bit of black when we're done. And that'll add feather texture if you want. Either way. But you're just adding a little texture. So all you would do is it's called the dotted coloring technique. And when you're doing something like feathers or something like that, it adds a really nice texture. It's the same technique I taught you with coloring fur with Stampin Blends. That video's on my blog and my YouTube channel too, on creating texture and fur. You can do the same thing here if you just use dots instead of coloring. And see how it kind of makes it look like it has feathers or texture? There you go. So we're just going to do that a little more there. And I'm adding just a little more to the light areas, but keeping the ends of my wings light. So I'm just kind of carrying some of that dark out. Because we want him to be black, but we want him to not be solid. We want to be able to see the texture of his wings. And see how those dots are bleeding really well because the swan is still wet? So if you're coloring right, the back end of your picture is going to have a lot of bleed through. Okay, that means your ink is staying nice and wet, and that's what we want. So I'm just adding a little more dark. And you can repeat this step or these steps as many times as you want to add more depth to your images. You can leave them as is, or you can continue and add depth. But if you start slowly, like we did, where we just did a little bit of black and a little bit of gray, you can always add more easier than take away. I mean, you can take away some color with your color lifter, but it's a little harder. So if we just build up our color, then we'll end up with more depth. Okay, it's looking pretty good there. So now I'm going to do the same thing with the dots with my light basic black. And I'm going to go to the dark areas and add a few dots. And it's still wet, so he's doing really well. Or you can just do it with lines if you want, remember? But I think the dots just kind of give you a little more texture and character. See how that's drawing out those accents? I'm just going right over the same lines that the artist has created, remember? We're just following what the stamp artist has already given you to make short work of it. Okay, now he's got a little more shadow below his wings here. So let's bring that black down just a little bit. We'll bring it out and down to give that big wing some more accent. Now you don't have to spend as much time doing this type of coloring when you're using alcohol markers. It's as much as you want to put into it, actually. Okay, so now doing the same thing, I'm going to bring in my next darker, which was the gray, and just bring out what I just did with the dark. And I still want to leave some light there, so don't cover all of your light. Try to keep those white tips on those wings, and it's just going to really give you a nice pop. So we're just blending our color out. And looky there. Isn't he looking beautiful? Just going to bring that out a little more. Now I'm going to go back to my lightest gray again and blend it all together. Just go over the whole thing real lightly. Now if this was a different color, you would probably not want to go over your light areas too much. You want a little more highlight. But he's black, so we want our black to just kind of be a subtle highlight, which is the lighter gray. And see, we still have our dots that gave us character. And there we go. We have a beautiful black swan. So now I'm going to take my black marker again and accent this area of his eye and his little area by his beak again. I'm just going to color that nice and dark. I think my black pen is... I should show you how to ink up your black pens. You just refill them with your ink refills. Color his eye nice. Now I'm going to bring in my white gel pen again and just do a tiny little white dot on his eye. That just gives it a little accent. And color his beak. And there you go. You'll have a beautiful black swan. And like I said, you can build up those colors you were using even more if you want to. But you'll see when he's put together on something, he works out perfect just like that to look like a perfect black swan. Okay. Now if you're doing an image, now this one I cut out and put on here. He's fussy cut, and I like that. But if you're doing an image and you want, see how it looks kind of flat? If you want to give your image some depth, take your one of your lightest markers, and this one here is light Seaside Spray, and you want to give your image a 3D. You know what you do? You go right along the edge, kind of just a feathered, you know, real rough edge around your image. See how he's popping 3D already? Go all the way around it. You can do this with, you know, kind of whatever colors you want. And then take your color lifter, take the feather edge, and go right over just the edge of where you just colored. That's why you want to do a rough edge. Just roughly go over the edge. And that's going to leave it a little darker right by the image, but carry out the color lighter. And you end up with a really nice 3D shadow. Okay? That's just an extra tip. But there you go. We've got a black swan and we've got a white swan. And I hope those answered some of your questions on coloring. And I hope you have a happy Stampin' Day. Bye-bye now.